gangsta Grizzly.
It's drama, starring the drama king himself, FD Signifier.
Oh, you are so fucking brain dead. I just come on the stream, jackass.
Featuring the socialist you all love to hate, Hassan Piker. He's been canceled for going on 5 years now. It's the Rewired Soul. You've probably never heard of them, but boy, do people hate them. Professor Flowers, DJ Mule, and Merrick DeVille, along with some special guests you've been dying to see. So get your tea ready, get those takes nice and hot, and get ready for the drama. This spicy, hot, juicy drama is sponsored by Adam and Eve. Go to adamandeve.com and use the promo code FD50 to get 50% off one item, along with free shipping to the US and Canada. Now let's get back to the drama.
So, if you are a regular viewer or follow me on my socials, etc., then you know that I make it a point to try my best to promote smaller channels as much as possible, especially the type of channels that struggle to gain visibility or just generally, challenge the types of voices and images that tend to be prominent for Black people online, in the media, even in, quote unquote, progressive Black media. There's still very clearly an absence of certain images or certain, views and frames of analysis. For example, one of my favorite videos from last year was from Frank Laundrie. The video had maybe less than 5,000 views when I posted it, and I can't take full credit for that video's success because that video is amazing and the algorithm understood that. But it did eventually get well over 100,000 views, and now it may be pushing 300,000, I'm not sure. But even beyond that, it's not just, Black figures. For example, the Leftist Cooks did a great video on dunking as bad praxis that more people definitely need to watch. And one time I even shared just this hilarious impression of West Side Gun just because I thought the shit was funny.
Can I get an iced tea with some ice, please? A scoop of ice cream? Same color as my white tea.
I share a lot of stuff, and people seem to appreciate that 99% of the time. I think people understand that without direct, action to share lesser seen things, the audience and the algorithm won't, notice stuff that's really good, but just hasn't quite hit the mark for algorithmic prioritization or whatever the word is. And at worst, people just ignore it. They just maybe aren't interested in whatever it is I post. But every once in a while, I get a strong negative reaction against something I've posted. And one such time was when I posted a creator named the Rewired Soul. So the first question I start with everybody is why were you canceled?
Yeah, so I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, been sober 10 years. At the time, it was 5-6 years, and I was working at a treatment center, and I ran groups, not as a therapist, not licensed, right, but peer support. And I wanted to start a YouTube channel to talk about mental health and addiction recovery, but wow, a lot of young people are watching this stuff go down and getting a lot of bad ideas about how friendships are, relationships are. So I'm like, maybe I could take some of this YouTube drama and kick it off and have conversations about mental health, relationships, and all that. And it was going really good for a while. A lot of people were loving it. But, my ego got the best of me. I blew up to 100,000 within a year. And I started tripping up, making some mistakes. And then critique videos started coming out. And, some of it very valid and places where I could, shape up. But you know how YouTube goes. Once people start getting views using your name, people just keep going.
A few years ago, the Rewired Soul was canceled. I wasn't aware of this when I posted, and when I looked into its cancellation, judging from the response I got, I thought I had reposted some type of super predator. As I looked over the comments section, a few things stuck in my head. First, I'm not about to die on the hill for a person I don't know, so I'll just be quiet. It's better him than me. Second, damn, it really must suck to have people react to your presence this way. I thought the video in question that I shared was pretty good. It was a pretty useful kind of baseline engagement with a topic around race that I thought was a good perspective to share with people. I didn't consider the social stigma that might be attached to the person that made the video, or what sharing the video, sharing someone else's content meant about me. And never did I think that I could cause drama for me, or more concerningly from my perspective, force another person to re-experience public shaming. Now, this isn't a endorsement of the Rewired Soul. This is not me coming to his defense per se, but I do want to be clear that his cancellation was not connected to any type of like abuse or direct harm that he did or stealing money, but it was clearly enough to ruin his YouTube career. And it was wild to witness up close how social sanction and public shaming can work in online spaces, and how just associating with a person who is experiencing a public shaming can be tantamount to doing the same thing that they did to get them shamed. And if you're not careful, you might end up being next on the list. You asked me a question a second ago, like, what did I think you did? And so the initial, like my initial thoughts, especially when you start talking about like left tube creators and whatnot, was that you had put hands on someone in an inappropriate way. Mm-hmm. And when I saw it was mostly just, you know, a lot of bad taste drama stuff, you know, and maybe at worst, let's say lying by omission, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, wow, that shit was intense.
Yeah, something we were discussing, like as a recovering drug addict, like I used to be a piece of garbage 10 years ago before I got sober, right? You know, my mom, she already lost a son, right? And she had to worry about me. I was dying. And she was looking at me like, get your act together. My son almost lost his father. Like, I was destroying the lives of everybody around me, and I got sober, I got better. And I went, you know, I went on this journey, and then I started working in treatment, and I told people like, hey, look, you can do this. You can stay sober and turn your life around, and people will forgive you. And within this like situation and like with public figures, we don't see that kind of, hey, you served your time, you changed, you grew. It's just like, no, here's your digression and you are done. Mm-hmm. 4 years later, if somebody even shares your video, we're coming out with guns blazing. You know what I mean?
This is something I understood, but only noticed from far away. And I'm gonna be real, it seemed kind of harsh. Maybe not the initial punishment, right? The thing that he needed to be held accountable for, but the fact that years later, it looked like he was not going to be able to move on from whatever it is he did. I couldn't help but think that it couldn't be easy to want to move on from a bad moment in your life and have that be persistently weaponized against you. That you had to constantly keep in mind that your personhood and how you see yourself is no longer in your control. That popping your head out for something completely unrelated would mean having to relive that situation and address that situation over and over and over again, whether deservedly or unfairly. I also got scared because I didn't want that shit to happen to me. I got a good thing going here, and I'm not about to risk it for none of you motherfuckers, despite how this video was actually going to go. Being seen as legitimate when you're Black, especially in any type of academic sense, is difficult and easily taken away. I've seen so many people try to question my intelligence, question my credentials, question anything about me except the actual analysis that I offer on these videos. And I've had it in the back of my head that every take, every opinion, every video, every tweet is possible evidence in the future case against FD Signifier. That if and when I do fuck up, it won't just be that moment where I fucked up, it'll be every moment I've recorded up until then. And if there's one thing I know from the internet as a whole, but especially the online left, is that you will be subject to critique, which isn't a bad thing. Everything should be critiqued to make sure things are going well and that the messages that are being put out are the messages that people need to see. But it can be a bit scary. I find myself being extra careful, policing my thoughts and actions in a way that doesn't feel like the practice of ethics or character development or being responsible with my platform, but just genuine anxiety and neurosis. It's not just me thinking I want to be a positive presence online and make people feel good and not contribute to harm. It's more me thinking, if I don't word this right, or if I share this random thought, if I don't say something about this issue here or say the wrong thing about this issue there, someone is going to try to interpret my action or inaction in bad faith, and I'll have thousands of comments and tweets flying at me. The parasocial nature of being a content creator and the depersonalized nature of social media makes it so people will critique and attack you in ways online that they never do in real life. And I know this because it happened to me a few months ago. Now, I survived my relatively mild cancellation by a specific group that I'll get to later, but the experience and the aftermath of it left me with a ton of questions and thoughts. Namely, why are we like this? Is this a good thing? Do y'all think does this feel good to y'all? Is this praxis? Is this direct action? How does this even work? Like, what goes into deciding who gets drugged and attacked and who doesn't? Also, is this why we're all here? Like, is this a bug of online interactions or a feature? Either way, what should we do about it? If we can do anything about it at all. In my video about Black Panther, the top rated comment now says the following. Incredibly brave of you to admit you are a fan of Nostalgia Critic. It was meant to be a cheeky joke at the expense of Doug Walker, aka the Nostalgia Critic, and it's true. I took no offense to it, and I have on a few occasions shown that I am a former fan of Nostalgia Critic. For those who know and are also former fans, it's not hard to see how his content and work influenced mine. For example, this running gag in the Nicki Minaj video where the elephant in the room pops up is outright stolen from the Nostalgia Critic.
I mean, it's better than the first film, but I'm... Yes?
Don't act like you don't see me.
What are you talking about?
You've been ignoring me since the beginning. Don't act like you don't know why I'm here.
And to hopefully make sure people understand that it was an homage as opposed to just clear theft, I got Dan Olson, a former creator with a short stint on Channel Awesome, the Nostalgia Critics, video record label that he had in the late 2010s, to voice that elephant. Come on, man.
No, FD, come on. Just get in there.
Okay.
Okay? You good?
I'm good. I think I'm good.
You're good.
That's literally one of my favorite jokes that I've done in my career, mostly because it's one of those jokes I know only a handful of people got the first time watching. Walker's definitely a persona non grata in a lot of spaces, not just because his content hasn't aged very well and hasn't evolved as all the other people inspired by him have evolved with their content, but also because of the story of the toxic, exploitative, and abusive practices that were happening behind the scenes under his media company, Channel Awesome, at that same time frame. My understanding of this controversy, it was that Doug was at most an enabler and not the real culprit behind a lot of it, but it still tarnished his legacy that he was in charge while a lot of bad things were happening, which is kind of sad because he is this major figure that innovated so much of what you probably watch on YouTube right now. So because of that influence and because he's not the worst guy, I've never been hesitant or too embarrassed or scared to mention my previous fandom of him despite his current reputation. Observing that a controversial figure was influential in media or art isn't tantamount to endorsing said behavior and shouldn't bring me under too much scrutiny, right? Right? All right, if you agree, remember you said that. So, you know who else is a big influence on my work that I've never mentioned publicly? Max Landis. Yeah, it gets deep. It's that type of video. Landis is another complex figure. I don't want to dig too far in his story and the details as to why he was canceled. I'll just say that the things he was accused of are a lot more severe than Doug Walker. But before all that happened, he was this unique figure both in Hollywood and on YouTube, and I was a huge fan, greatly because of the way he talked about writing and being creative.
I got one question more than any other question. How do I have an idea for a movie? I haven't written anything. I just have a blank page. There are a million answers to that, but I'm going to give you one that I don't know if you've heard before, which is maybe you shouldn't. If you really don't have any ideas for movies and you're scared of writing a movie and you can't finish a movie, then maybe you're not a screenwriter, and that's not bad. But if you have a bunch of ideas for movies and you really want to be a screenwriter and it's all you want, it's things you want so bad, Can I say something to you? And I hope you really hear me. Just write a script. A blank page is not frightening. It's opportunity. It's empty land. It's not a void. It's a void you have complete control over.
He has this passion for creativity and thinking about media that is infectious and kind of unique. And for those with whatever type of brain thing I have, it was inspiring. It made me keep thinking about how eventually I wanted to do exactly what I'm doing now.
No one gets what's special about Superman. What's special about Superman is that his parents didn't die. He's not a selfish post-traumatic sissy who needed to have his parents shot to death in front of him to understand that maybe you should help people and that crime is wrong and murder is bad. He didn't get stranded on a desert island. He didn't have a ring forced upon him that brought him into an intergalactic police force. He's just a guy from Kansas who has the best superpowers. And instead of absolute power corrupting absolutely, absolute power has absolved him from fear and greed and hate and all of the weaknesses that stem from human insecurity.
And he made some good stuff, like his video, Wrestling Isn't Wrestling, is legit one of my favorite YouTube videos of all time. If you are a wrestling fan, you've seen that video. And if you're a wrestling fan and you haven't watched that video, you need to go watch that video. And if you've watched my Kanye video, you recognize again how that video and how he influenced me. More amazingly, years ago when I had less than 1,000 subscribers, he actually commented on one of my videos. It was the first edgelord video. It had maybe 1,000 views at the time. And he found this video and left a negative comment. He left a negative comment, and I'm pretty sure he was still in the middle of being canceled at the time. And I don't know all the details, but like I said, his cancellation was not something, it wasn't good. But I wasn't thinking about his cancellation. I didn't know all the details. I just knew he was canceled, and I kind of didn't care because this guy that inspired me popped up in my comment section. I'm a nobody YouTuber with no clout, no algorithmic integrity, whatever. And my response to his negative comment was, oh shit, it's Max Landis. We eventually had a short dialogue around why I wasn't wrong and why his comment wasn't a good critique of what I was saying and yada, yada, yada. But every few months, especially since I've learned more about what he was canceled for, I think about this short, really meaningless exchange. And I wonder if someone screen grabbed it. I wonder if that person who wants to make the FD takedown video is going to go find that comment and pull it out to prove it as a way that I'm a bad person, that I had this positive exchange with a person who might be a sexual abuser. Am I going to get one of those "the signs were all there" treatments? You might think this is irrational, but then you don't know LeftTube. You don't have the perspective that I and a lot of us have as we amass followings and fan bases, or worse, anti-fan bases. I've seen people with a hate obsession for someone try to make grand sweeping statements about a person's character, their personality, their actual lives away from YouTube with evidence as flimsy as liking a particular tweet. And I know this because I've seen it. In as few sentences as possible, which may be hard for you, why have you been canceled before?
Oh man. Buying a house, being wealthy, having Twitch's salaries leak, and then rerunning that same narrative of like Hassan is successful and wealthy, buying a car, buying a Gucci shirt, and going to Coachella. I kind of ran the gamut like earlier this past week. Saying cracker, saying America deserved 9/11, and some other stuff about Dan Crenshaw and his eye hole.
Being positively associated with Hassan means that I get tagged whenever something from his past gets brought up to prove how bad a guy he is. Now, Hassan is not perfect nor above critique. I think Hassan would admit his bad habits and mistakes, but there's also clearly a lot of attacks that are based around rumors or cobbled together conjecture, something that isn't hard to do when you stream for 40 hours a week. There's just a lot of evidence sitting there to create a narrative with.
This guy
has the understanding of foreign policy of like a 12-year-old. What the What the is wrong with this dude? Didn't he go to war and like literally lose his eye because some mujahideen, a brave soldier?
When you're in this space, you just have to assume that everything you do is being watched and evaluated. The very nature of releasing content and being on social media means that you are purposely putting yourself under surveillance. And this creates this unnatural headspace that I and others exist in. And it reminds me of a concept called the panopticon by French philosopher and critical theorist Michel Foucault. The panopticon is a prison built as a circular tower inside of a large superstructure. The prison cells are on the outside of the superstructure, and each cell has no walls. A prison guard is in a tower in the center of the prison, and from his vantage point, he can see every prisoner within the prison, and he can monitor their behavior. But the prisoners, kind of just doing their own thing, can't tell when they're being watched, when they're being surveilled by this officer who is essentially the state in this moment. And because of this, out of fear, because they don't know when they're being watched and monitored, they just police their own behavior naturally. And the state or the prison guard doesn't even have to actually exert direct power over them to control their behavior. It's a funny implication of the power that we have, and we're still normal people. There's something to that I haven't put my wrap my brain around yet, that I'm not comfortable with, but I don't like it.
Back in the day, I was like, I need to immediately go out and address this sort of stuff. Like, oh my God, I need to, like, people are lying about me. Because it just brings up like, people make it seem like you're a bad person, you're a villain, you're right. Immoral. They have to moralize their content consumption, and they have to also moralize like the kinds of content that they don't like. You can't just say, I don't like this guy, something's off about it, and move on. It's always like there has to be like a moral reason. So I recognize all that, and I just, when it first happens, like there's like this weight on me almost. Like I feel, I feel it in my entire body. This weird experience. But
I feel that.
And you're just like constantly scrolling, constantly looking at like all the new updates and stuff. Nowadays, my best practice is just like, if it gets to a certain point, address it and then move on. And you just keep moving on, especially because like a lot of these people are just outright uncharitable.
Many dates. I Photoshop a picture of Hassan and tell people he is West Elm Caleb and should be avoided. Pretty successful. A few people quote tweet and fall for it. We'll call this C tier.
Is that funny to you?
It's hilarious.
That's not funny. Stop laughing.
I mean,
he's the worst. No, he's not lying. He did all of this. No, he routinely did this. He did this all the time. People still literally believe that one.
I mean, data doesn't lie, dude.
The worst part about it is he very openly states, like, I work for Hassan Piker on his account. And half of these motherfuckers either don't know or they do know and they don't care.
I bring this concept up partly influenced by Brody Deschanel's recent video discussing the nature of cancel culture and what I'm going to call the accountability myth. In her video, Brody Deschanel uses philosophy from Foucault as well as Judith Butler to engage with the nature of what it means to be canceled and why, though in some ways valuable, the concept of canceling, aka the variety of experiences that entail modern public shaming, is not as based in some type of liberation praxis like many try to tell themselves.
By inflicting pain upon the condemned and spilling their blood for everyone to see, public tortures could inadvertently expose that person's humanity. According to Foucault, in some instances, it would evoke feelings of sympathy and pity from the audience, who would rally behind the condemned and speak out against the monarchies. Yet, less than 100 years later, Foucault observes criminals were sitting in prisons. The only reason public torture was phased out of practice, he argues, was because prisons made it easier for sovereigns and later governments to consolidate their control over the people. Torture was messy. Prisons were orderly, centralized, and hidden from public view. And so it was easier to eliminate that unpredictable element of humanity. Prisons were designed to strip the condemned of their humanity, so there would be no sympathy for them. The reason Foucault doesn't see prisons as any more humane than public torture is because both were enacted for the same reasons.
And that's the complex thing about so-called cancel culture or the woke mob or whatever the other bullshit the right tries to say. It's not real, but it kind of is. Outside of our box, our community, or any given box or community on social media or outside of social media, rich people, people with power, or people who have no shame or no accountability to a community can do whatever the fuck they want. People like Elon Musk, Dave Chappelle, J.K. Rowling, Nicki Minaj, they don't care about cancel culture because to them, this shit doesn't exist. They have no idea who we are or what we're talking about. They're insulated by both fame and resources and money to make your mean tweet about them kind of mean nothing. We don't have the power to hold any of those people accountable for their behavior. So we tweet about it. We might protest or strike or boycott or try to create some type of movement around our outrage. And maybe that does sway public perception at some point. And that does sometimes result in, something happening. Maybe people get deplatformed or lose out on opportunities. But at the end of the day, many of those people, those rich and powerful people, are untouchable, especially if they're good at what they do. Because the reality is, you're only as canceled as your next project.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Chappelle!
If the baby actually made good music, he'd still be a megastar. Instead, I heard he's trying to give away his tickets at Cheesecake Factory. I don't know. But regular people, even those who are popular, can definitely be affected by social shaming and ridicule. We don't have any of those flexible resources that the people with power and money have. And this is overall a good thing. It means that, at least for people like me, I need to be responsible with my platform for fear that I could be held accountable to the community that gave me a platform in the first place. But it also puts me in a weird, depersonalized position to always be thinking about myself outside of myself. I am no longer just my actual real name. I am that person and FD Signifier. FD Signifier is not my real name. But way more people know who he is than the person that I'll start being again once I turn this camera off. And if I fuck up, parts of both of those people would be affected. And parts of both of those people may be taken into account, but also may not be. Will I be seen as a person capable of mistakes or as a person in a position of power deserving to be held accountable? Regardless of the fact that held accountable can mean a whole lot of wild shit depending on how pissed off people might be on Twitter. Max Fisher is I don't know what the fuck he is. He's whatever this title is. Wrote a book called The Chaos Machine. Chaos Machine is basically about how the internet and social media has us all fucked up in the head. And he purports that much of our behavior with public shaming is really reflexive and evolutionary, that it's not like a willful ugliness within us, but legitimately evolutionary psychology that we've had since we were apes. I always get iffy when we get into biological essentialism, but he at least presents a good argument. And the conclusion to that argument is basically that we as a species, humans, are biologically predisposed to engage in social sanction for people who commit social transgressions or don't behave in a way that promotes social cohesion. And it doesn't take you to be a biological essentialist to say that people need people, humans need humans, communities are really important, and being pushed out of a community is one of the hardest things you might go through. Thus, it makes some sense that we might evolve to try to be cohesive as a species. I don't know. And in many ways, I'd argue that social media has empowered people to create social sanctions around behavior that was not seen as problematic, only a few years ago. It has given certain populations the opportunity to spotlight harmful and dangerous behaviors that some of us have been subject to for centuries, going back to actually being apes. But he also points out some flaws in how this reflexive, possibly biological thing we do doesn't really match up well to what social media is. For example, he talks about the woman mostly known as Central Park Karen, the woman that was at a dog park in New York who wrongfully called the police on a black man who was correctly telling her that she needed to put her dog on a leash.
I'm gonna tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like. The police are not our friends. And before the advent of cell phone videos, the brutalization and murder of black people by the police was something that we only seemed to understand and talk about, and nobody else seemed to quite get it. But because of social sanctions, social shaming, and the advent of social media, everyone has now seen videos, sadly, of black people being brutalized and murdered by the police. And everyone that saw this video and heard this woman say, "I'm gonna call the police and tell them that a black man is attacking me," immediately understood what was bad about this behavior from this woman. She literally endangered this man's life, and she knew that. And she suffered for her transgression. She was publicly shamed. She lost her job. They even took the woman's dog, which is hilarious, but also it kind of begs a question. Was this accountability? What did we improve from this situation other than the cathartic release that we did something? What major issue was fixed here? You may not remember, but only a week later, George Floyd was murdered by the police. And a year later, she was interviewed by a podcast and seemingly recanted any culpability for what she did and played the victim all over again.
I was in a situation, I was a woman, I was alone in a park. I had been threatened multiple times at this point. My dog was trying to be lured away from me. And to the same extent, if it had been a white man, I would have said, there's a white man threatening me. If it had been a white woman, I would have said a white woman is threatening me. It was just a descriptive term.
And she even got her fucking dog back. The reason for weaponizing public shaming as accountability stems from a very important and reasonable expectation to not be shitty, to not endanger a black man's life by weaponizing white femininity to exert police violence over him. But the harder question I have to ask is whether or not any of these things actually lead to accountability and any type of restorative process or just stopping the problem. When really what people came for with that story was the spectacle and the public shaming. Amy Cooper, the woman in question, I'm sure is back working again, has moved on with her life and got her dog back within a few weeks of that incident. Meanwhile, we have moved on to the next issue. And because she lives a private life, most of you don't even know she did this podcast that showed that she learned basically nothing from the experience. Meanwhile, 4 years later, Rewired Soul, who did some sleazy shit with his channel after losing his burgeoning YouTube career, apologizing, going away, then coming back with a completely different type of content, is still being held accountable. I don't know. I'm just saying. The whole narrative around public shaming as accountability doesn't hold up well under scrutiny if you're brave enough or have enough clout to try to analyze it and not worry about the consequences. Further, when you look closer at how it works for those with public platforms, it becomes very difficult to parse fair criticism from bad faith attacks for likes and clout.
People, unfortunately, I think hyper-focus on short-term benefits. And the easiest way to get short-term benefits is by shitting on, one of the top dogs or someone who has like a large audience. And it is successful. Like I look at these, I see it, like some of these YouTube profiles, like they got 10,000 views on a video. They talk shit about me, boom, 800,000 views, right? Mm-hmm. But what they fail to recognize, and I keep talking about this, you are only getting a boost from a group of haters. They're not becoming your return customers, if you will, if you want to think about it like that. They're not becoming a part of your community. And if they are becoming a part of your community, it's because you're constantly putting the crosshairs on someone else, but they're not there to learn. They're not there to like understand what your worldview is. They're there to see you take some other people down. It's crazy, just all these videos, like these people getting more views than I ever got on a single video, right? So not only are these narratives being told about me, but I can't even take back the narrative because I can't get as many views as them, which is crazy, right? And, but, even to this day, it's something that I've had to worry about for 4 years. It's crazy when you have that much hate coming after you, and it's difficult too because the audience, they're like, no, this is just
accountability. No, these are valid criticisms. I'm like, no, I'm specifically talking about the people threatening me, right? This is what I'm talking about. Those are the people I'm talking about and I'm worried about.
For us, or at least for me, it feels more like being in that panopticon, or really a reverse panopticon, where the jailers are all on the outside and they're your fan base and your anti-fans. And I am on the inside, and I don't know who's who really. I can't tell who's just appreciating the content and who's observing with the goal of eventually holding me accountable. From my perspective, the concept of holding people accountable is deeply connected to a harmful and mythologized idea that punishing people is good. Accountability, as we tend to enact it, is in its nature, to me, a part of the carceral state. It is related to the idea of punishment and prisons, that causing suffering to someone who does harm will somehow reduce suffering elsewhere. And maybe that was true when we were apes or nomadic tribes, but now with social media, as Max Fisher tells it, it's mostly just chaos. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a concept of justice or restoration for people who are victims, or depowering people that use that power to hurt others, and a lot of other really complex things. But what's clear to me at a minimum is that accountability, especially within community, has to be consented to, as in the person being held accountable needs to acknowledge that a wrong was done and that a change needs to be made to address whatever the conflict or problem was. And again, there's definitely a space for retribution at times, but I fear that for a lot of us, even on the online left, what we're seeking isn't restoring a wrong done or fixing a problem, but the catharsis of domination and being able to punish someone, especially from our tentatively disempowered state. And unlike our enemies who are beyond our reach and have no shame, within community, we can force accountability onto each other. In fact, I'd argue it's one of our most favorite things. It's one of the reasons why the dunk or the debunk video is so popular in all political media. But when accountability is forced and people avoid making mistakes out of fear, what we really create, especially within community, is this semi-carceral environment, this purity testing culture within the panopticon, where everybody feels like everybody's watching, and a lot of people aren't growing, learning, or trying new things. They're just policing themselves to avoid social shame. Going back to my fandom for Max Landis, along with Kanye West, Lauryn Hill, Mike Tyson, problematic people I've made videos about. I have an interest in complex, problematic figures and analyzing what makes them great and interesting despite those things. Maybe I am completely overblowing that may be something used against me. My rational brain says everyone has flaws, everyone has quirks. And as I stated in the Kanye West video, I didn't seek to create intimate connections with these people or their art, nor have I ever excused or endorsed their wrongdoings. But another still very rational part of me says that if and when I fuck up, someone is going to clip together everything I've ever said about anyone problematic, and that's going to be evidence, astroturfed across somebody's 45-minute to an hour essay, or possibly even longer. And maybe that will happen eventually. And if and when it happens, I'll just deal with the criticism and then consent to being held accountable by my community. Maybe after that, hopefully drop some good videos and move on with my life and career, right? But if I've learned anything in my short, limited time of being significant in this space and on this app, is that it's never as simple as being criticized or taking accountability. What it's really about is drama. Juicy, delicious drama. This is what y'all are really here for. So let me just jump right in. This is DJ Mule. DJ Mule is a small political streamer and video essayist. I connected with Mule well before I was a big deal on the platform. I don't know Mule well outside of his content and a few conversations and social media interactions, but I became connected with him through mutuals and came to appreciate and respect him on various levels. He makes short and to the point essays about practical issues around leftist politics. He streams and kind of analyzes other people's content. And he, unlike a lot of other content creators, has actually participated and continues to participate in political action and organizing. He also stands up for his friends, even when it's not the safe and easy thing to do. He's got a dope ass beard. Seems like a good dude to me. What were you canceled for?
God knows. What I see it as is that I was cancelled for saying things that Xanderhall did and saying that they were bad. So I was cancelled for criticizing a guy, right? But in reality, what they're sort of canceling me for, what they say is the reality, is that I am either an abuse apologist or I'm an actual abuser, not just an abuse apologist. Like by virtue of being an abuse apologist, I'm also an abuser, probably. Right. Like they're saying, oh, he probably would abuse you at a Ren fair. And then thirdly, the other thing that I've seen is that, like, oh, he won't address women who are speaking to him. Like, he won't address women that have done these videos about him and stuff like that. So I'm a misogynist and a transphobe as well. Right. So it's like there's these set things that, because I would understand if people would think like, oh, you're being too toxic. I would be like, all right, fair enough. Like, you know, that's
that would be my criticism. If I was to be a direct critic of the video, it was too toxic.
Yeah. Thus, and that's fine. Thus
legitimizing criticism.
Right.
And so like that, and like that's when I did my milquetoast defense of you, it was like, okay, if you think that was too toxic and you don't like me for continuing to associate, the dope thing about being a real motherfucker is that you stand on your square.
Right.
It's like, there's going to be consequences. I have these convictions.
Yeah.
And there's going to be consequences to that. And that means that some people are not going to fuck with me. The great benefit of that is that I now have to worry less about caring about other people's opinions. When I knew I wanted to make a video about conservative sex a few months ago, I thought it'd be good to reach out to him to collaborate with me. He's made videos on pick me queers and kink at Pride and showed that he had a really useful perspective on how a queer man like himself might deal with internalized hatred toward their queerness, and that may be useful for analyzing what I was looking to analyze in that video. And if you watched the video, you saw he had an excellent contribution. I interviewed DJ Mule for that video in early August, and 2 weeks later, DJ Mule released a video called Xanderhall is Not Your Ally, what I think could be most fairly described as an attack video about mid-sized leftist political streamer Xanderhall. To be fully transparent, I don't like Xanderhall. Xanderhall is definitely not Pog in my book. When I talk about how I don't feel safe in that reverse panopticon experience and how I feel like there's people that are seeking to astroturf ridiculous takes and reaches about who I am to make me look bad and create anti-fandom, it's folks like Xanderhall that usually come to mind when I'm talking about that.
FD signifier is a dumb fuck. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
He has on occasion insulted me and my intelligence. He's attacked people I consider friends in this content creation space. His editor has at least on one occasion tried to spread the notion that I was homophobic based off of a misreading of a tweet that was so bad that I remember vividly in her own subtweets, people were saying, "This is stupid, delete this." So for the most part, I've paid minimal attention to Xanderhall and was perfectly fine not bothering with any drama related to him, including the drama between him and DJ Mule. But sadly, when DJ Mule's appearance in my video became known, I suddenly became aware that I had inadvertently gotten involved in drama, not just with Xanderhall, but his community as a whole, because Mule's attack video on Xanderhall had become a trending topic with Xanderhall's community and the broader community of streamers that he belongs to, which I'll get to later. So you may be asking why Mule's video set off an entire community to make him public enemy number one, especially considering Mule at the time maybe had 8,000 subscribers. And the video before they started showing it to each other may have had all of 10,000 views. So let's break that down just a bit. In the video, Mule presents several, I think, valid points about Xander Hall. He critiques his politics, he critiques his penchant for creating drama and attacking people, for weaponizing his fan base to attack people. Things that I completely agree with. It is what it is. Fuck Xander Hall. However, he then took it a step further. In a misguided attempt to really hit Xander Hall while it hurts, Mule decided to spend a lot of time focusing on Xander Hall's toxic relationship with an ex-partner. I will not make the mistake of trying to break down all the different angles that Mule tries to engage with what this relationship really was. I have never fully watched that section of the video. I haven't watched many of the responses to that section of the video. I'll just say that Xander Hall's partner had a substance abuse issue. And for me, having seen addiction up close, I definitely think that this was in bad taste and at a minimum trivialize how difficult the experience can be when you are in a relationship with somebody who is in addiction. And even for a guy that I do not like, I don't think Xander Hall deserved that.
I was, like I said, I was purposefully toxic to this guy. I was, and I don't regret it. I don't regret it for a second because I wanted to point out how horrible they could be. I wanted to make myself, put myself out there as sort of like a, I don't know, like what do you know, when you put like a piece of ham up over the trenches and it gets shot to shit or whatever, right? So like, you know, because the way I saw it was, they're going to say everything about me. It doesn't even matter. Like, even if I just talk about Kira and Sophie and this, that, and the other, even if I don't even touch the stuff about his girlfriend, they're going to go ham, literally ham. Like, you know, but
like the ham on the,
like the ham on the stick. Right. So I just thought, fuck it. Like, I'm going to tell him exactly what I think. I think he's a fucking piece of shit.
From Mule's perspective, however, Xander Hall and many within his community have been harassing him and his friends for months, mostly due to bad blood and drama that has existed between various factions within these communities, because person X used to date person Y and person Z loves person Y, and so eventually started attacking person X, which caused person M to look into person Z and make accusations about person Z, and it's like white Bloods and Crips at this point, and I unknowingly, because I'm connected to certain people within that space, I got wrapped up in the middle of it. This is what I get for hanging out with too many white people. Like, you understand what I'm saying. Most of the people I talk to understand what I'm saying, but like when I sit down with my wife and say, this guy is creeping me out, I have to like do a lot of explaining to say, no, babe, you don't understand. This video said this video said that, and now I'm here. You know what I mean? So
I don't know what your wife is telling you, but she's most likely right. I'm just going to be honest with you. Immensely valuable. A lot of people don't have that. You should absolutely lean on that as best as you can. Like they will 100% like bring you back to reality where you're like, why the fuck am I talking about some fucking nerd? Like some 20-year-old nerd with no life experience who's only been behind a fucking camera giving me grief about something that they misunderstood. Like that is, you know, you should snap out of it in that moment.
But I want to be clear, I chose a side, and I chose it for a reason, because I had witnessed the outsized amount of attention and harassment and abuse from one particular side, all in the name of accountability, I'm sure. Criticism will be one thing, right? Because like, everyone and everything needs to be critiqued. And to quote one of the smaller figures within this overall space, when you like make a video and 10,000 people online tell you that it sucks, that might feel like harassment, but the reality is that's probably just a hazard of the job, right? That's true. But like, people will just post innocuous random things on Twitter, and then their subtweets will be just full of people calling them shitty and saying mean and ugly things to them. And that's different than like people commenting under your video. That's you like not being able to enter into a public square without parasocial weirdos who want to impress their favorite streamer, or in my case, Drake, for some reason. Look it up on my Twitter. So yeah, I kind of think that counts as harassment because that doesn't have anything to do with ideas and content. That's personal. So in Mule's head, he was giving this toxic community a taste of his own medicine, sliding on the ops in the name of his set. And by all accounts, it worked. They went to town on him and they stopped bothering a lot of the other people that had been targeted within his space.
I kind of got over it because I realized that like a lot of these people are just kids. Like that was the most insane thing to me, right? You know, you've seen this.
These are like literal 16, 19-year-olds.
Literally, like one of the funniest things that I ever saw in like people harassing me on the internet and stuff was this like guy, and he probably because he's German, like his English isn't perfect or something, but it was just this nonsense. It was like he was saying, "Hey, dude, just because lefty teenager watch debate doesn't mean they go white supremacist." You know, and all this stuff. And I was like, what are you talking? I never even said that. Like, you've made that up. I didn't say that. Like, just this nonsense. And I looked at his profile and he was like 14 years old. I was like, oh, okay, right. So this is a German teenager who's like watching Vorsch and just like getting his mind melted.
And again, as much love as I have for some of those folks, I would not have cared about none of this shit had it not been for two things. One, Mule definitely upset people who weren't his intended targets, some of which weren't even in Xander Hall's community. A lot of people kind of caught strays from the energy Mule was giving off. And two, he made himself such an enemy to that community that by platforming him, I now became a bigger enemy to that community than I already was when I was just mostly ignoring them. It gave them a reason to put my name in their mouths. And I can tell you, especially with Xander Hall, they've really been looking for an excuse to put my name in their mouth.
A couple days ago, FD Signifier uploaded a new video. And apparently in this video, he collaborates with a friend of the channel, DJ Mule.
I want to be clear. I don't think DJ Mule should have went there, despite understanding what he did. Had I been aware of the intensity of the backlash at the time, to be honest, I probably would have cut him from the video, not because I agree with the totality of the backlash, but just to avoid the drama, to avoid the panopticon. But I didn't, and just like that, I had fucked up. I gave DJ Mule a lukewarm offense in the sign of a couple of tweets and a general get the fuck out of here to the fans that were coming at me saying that they didn't like that I platformed him, going as far as to say, unsubscribe if you don't like it. Unlike the Rewired Soul, I didn't sit back and mind my business. I rolled with the squad. But unlike the other umpteen times that this space has cried foul play against criticism, it was clear that this was one that they had some modicum of the high ground. And I didn't realize that until after I had gotten more than a few Twitter threads and a bunch of response videos from some mostly small creators in that space. And so for a couple of weeks, it felt like that particular thing was the only thing that existed in my online content creator career. And it was mild overall. It was a surreal experience, but I can't act like it was the worst thing ever for me. Still, I don't think you can even understand it until you've been through it. It's one thing to have criticism, it's one thing to hit the dislike button, but it's another to be the subject of discourse. To see your face on someone else's screen or thumbnail, but it's not your content, it's not you talking, it's someone else talking about you and creating truth about who you are without your involvement. Which at the time was tough because, as my tweet stated, I find it kind of galling and ironic that many within this community want to clutch their pearls at the toxic behavior from DJ Mule, because it would be so easy for me to point out the hypocrisy for them to come down so hard, considering how many in that space tend to behave. Like Xander Hall himself did an abuse apologia to a small trans creator just a year before all this happened, and it seems like that shit doesn't count, I guess.
Xander Hall responded by targeting my mental health, going so far as to state that, quote, "It's a well-known fact that EOT is legitimately an abusive piece of shit with mental issues. I hope they seek professional help so they can get better and improve their life. It can't be healthy to live like that."
I've done enough research on the cycle of abuse to know that there's probably a good chance that Essence of Thoughts abuse, which they've alluded to, probably has affected their current mental state. I really don't think that is like a bad take. Armchair Psychology is cringe. Okay, you know what, guys? If you guys really fucking hate Armchair Psychology, I will abstain from the Armchair Psychology then, all right? I apologize, chat. Jesus Christ. God damn. Now I can't post this on YouTube because Essence of Thought's gonna clip that and be like, ha! Even Xander Hall's own audience agrees with me.
The day after I'd publicly received a threat of violence on his behalf, Xander Hall had to block a load of trans people he'd gone after out of fear of being flagged for hate and harassment. But he couldn't do this without telling his fans that he loved to see them, quote, tear them apart, end quote.
Like cheering his fan base on as they attacked her online. The type of behavior that DJ Mule is guilty of is par for the course in that community. A brief list of the offensive, egregious, and indefensible things done and said, both past and present, would be longer than most of their stream. Like, it would be so easy for me to just, like, cobble together a handful of their worst moments and just put it out there as evidence of how bullshit this all was. But that would be beneath me. Or is it?
Black music, I guess you would say, like most depictions of black culture, mostly glorify rags to riches stories, money, and sex. For white people as well. I don't know if you've noticed this, but ton of poor white people also smoke crack. It's a poor people drug. It's just most black people in America are poor, and that's why we associate it like that.
Say a certain slur in private, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you can start to develop negative attitudes or thoughts about a certain group of people, or you can make those words more pervasive in society in such a way that you help other people have negative thoughts about groups of people. If we believe that that is to be the case, then my argument would be that we should try to eradicate slurs entirely from all of society, and that includes rappers saying the N-word.
You realize they were N-words in the SS,
Dude,
right?
you can just say
Whew. Wow. Oh God! Oh, he paid. Oh, he said the word. Oh.
And his tweets weren't hateful at all, really. They were just... Oh, he did imply that she was a man, but...
She looks like a man.
She looks...
That's
she's
not
ugly.
racist.
She's just ugly.
She's
yeah, it's
ugly.
not racist. First of all, she looks like... And apparently he or somebody, like, said Leslie Jones looked like a gorilla. And like a pathetic attempt to like white knight for this was like, but she does, it's not racist to say that. And like, in my mind, like I genuinely didn't think it was racist at the time.
I support Hillary because she will create safe spaces for people of color, away from white people. Their own schools, their own buses, own water fountains, own benches. Because she's a progressive.
I didn't just show that montage for the sake of illustrating the absurd hypocrisy of some in this community, like I said, clutching their pearls that someone dared to be toxic to one of their own. Though I won't lie, it did feel good. But more importantly, I wanted to show how this concept of accountability hinges really on the power that a community can exert over you. The folks from that section are in community with each other and are the only ones capable of deciding what's transgressive within their community, what requires public shaming and ostracism, and what accountability should look like. In fact, one of the figures featured in that montage is, I guess, no longer in that community because they did too much toxic shit and they no longer could ride with the squad. On the flip side, even if I show 100 different montages of bad behavior, I don't have the power to make that community accountable. And that community will not consent to being held accountable by me, just like DJ Mule rightfully won't consent to being held accountable by them. But that doesn't stop us from trying, and it kind of goes both ways. DJ Mule's video, especially the parts at the end that get too personal, are an example of trying to exert an external pressure using this, what I believe is carceral mentality, to affect and hopefully publicly shame a person and a community that he thinks is harmful, that has harmed him and his peers. And that community in turn used his video to turn the tables and reverse Uno carceral attacks against DJ Mule to try to oust him from community and publicly shame him. And it was more effective. And I think it was more effective because, at least in the context of what was happening, DJ Mule was more toxic. He was a legitimate target to aim their ire at in the moment, regardless of everything else that was happening. It also didn't hurt that he was so much smaller than most of the people making content about him. And I can't help but think that part of the reason why this was such a big deal for this community is because, again, for all the critiques and complaints that happened to this community, this was the one time they had any semblance of the high road. And you see it and hear it in the excessive way they speak about him. Like, literally, he is the devil to them. It's hilarious at this point.
Like, for his better mustache, he just looks like a guy that got too drunk and would start sexually abusing you at a fucking rent fair. Sorry. Yeah. Welcome to the rent fair.
And this reveals an element of social shaming and cancel culture that I haven't seen brought up enough, in that it's not just about the person being shamed and their perceived transgression. It's also about the community doing the shaming in the first place, and how that shaming works as a vessel for said community to affirm its values, mores, and norms, which then begs the question, what does it mean when a community participates in a shaming campaign that is not just non-consensual, but really unjustifiable, and to most people on the outside looking in, incredibly shameful in and of itself?
In as few words as possible, why were you canceled?
In as few words as possible. Honestly, because white people are fucking racist.
But like, what would they say? What would they say?
Oh, what would they say?
Yeah.
They would say that that it's because I want to genocide white people and create a black ethno-state.
Professor Flowers is probably one of the most well-known victims of the community I've been talking about before. When DJ Mule talks about defending his friends, Professor Flowers is one of the people he's talking about. I'd argue that in an indirect way, she's a big reason why DJ Mule received the backlash that he did. Because this community has tried to make her into this like effigy and caricature, and nobody outside of their community is buying it. Because after what they did to her, a lot of people in the online left drew a line in the sand and became more openly hostile to the presence of people like Xander Hall, because unlike Mule, who again did something toxic and thus on some level deserved criticism, it takes a certain type of person to think that what happened to Professor Flowers was justified, and that type of person is probably racist.
So I didn't realize that there's like an entire sphere of people who are making content around what's going on, like with Debate Bros. And so like, in addition to like, I would just like be on Twitter one day and I would get like an even more intense flood of like hatred that day, because I would just like tweet something like, oh, I have book club, and then people would be like, you're a genocider, and like it was just like every day people were trying to hold me accountable to something that I didn't say. It was their interpretation of what I meant, and that was really intense. But then it would just be like a flood of something, a particular flood of something, and it'd be like, oh, someone must have talked about me. And I would find out a few hours later, oh, Vosh talked about me again, or someone else talked about me again, and I wouldn't even know who these people were most of the time. And so it would just be like this constant flood for 6 months of just like people trying to hold me accountable for something that I literally never said and literally do not believe and have not believed. So that in itself was intense, minus the, getting called a, minus the sexual harassment and getting sent all sorts of weird messages and DMs. That was just a really intense experience to have.
Professor Flowers was another small creator who dared to be critical of the Debate Bro community. Unlike DJ Mule, she did not cross any personal lines. Specifically, she called out the streamer Vosh, the biggest or second biggest entity in this community, depending on how you want to draw the lines, because he had this awful habit of comparing white nationalism with black nationalism when it was convenient for him, because I've also recently seen that he's admired black nationalism at times, which is fucking hilarious.
The best way, I think, to visualize it for anyone listening, separatism is basically self-determination and creating as much space away from your oppressors as possible, allowing you to act upon that self-determination. If that creating space from oppressors requires violence, then it requires violence. It doesn't have to, though. You can talk about Rosewood.
So far, I'm not sure how I've heard anything that differentiates this from traditional white nationalism. It's just the language.
So there was a conflict. There was a few videos, a few reaction to the videos, and then eventually a debate. In this debate, Vosh again insinuates that he thinks black nationalism and white nationalism are the same thing, which means that Vosh is implying that he doesn't know the difference between black political icons like W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, or Kwame Ture compared to white supremacists like David Duke, Richard Spencer, or Timothy McVeigh. You know, an honest mistake that any normal non-racist person would make. Now, this may seem absurd, considering that a guy like Timothy McVeigh was a frontman for a violent domestic terrorist organization responsible for the biggest act of domestic terrorism on United States soil, and W.E.B. Du Bois was a philosopher and father of American sociology who helped create Black History Month and helped grow Pan-Africanism, helped found my alma mater, Clarkland University, supported decolonization efforts for nations across Africa, was eventually targeted by the McCarthy Coalition due to his socialist leanings, fled America, and died in exile while in Ghana. But Vosh doesn't even know how to pronounce his name, so I get the hint that he may not be overly familiar with that legacy.
Essentially, if you read Marx and Trotsky and Gramsci and What You Want to Do Ski and whomever else, but not Du Bois, Fanon, Hooks, Crenshaw, etc.
Wait, is it Du Bois or Du Bois? Or wait, did he reject the French pronunciation? Was it Du Bois or Du Bois? It is? It is what? Why would you say it's Du Bois? Okay, cool. Isn't it Du Bois? That's what I thought I learned, but okay. He rejected the French pronunciation. What a fucking based god. Holy shit. Based anti-French linguistic activism.
But to his credit, the word nationalism is in both of those labels. And there are hoteps and other conservative figures that claim to be black nationalism. So you can imagine why within 5 minutes of this debate, he brings up ethnic cleansing of white South Africans, you know, the classic white supremacist dog whistle. Nothing concerning about that. It legit pains me to be rehashing this drama, not just because it's going to activate certain members of this community that this is just their hill to die on and continues to be their hill to die on, and also will probably activate another round of harassment and attack videos against Professor Flowers along with myself. But the other thing that makes engaging with this like painful is that this line of thinking and behavior toward black leftists is one of the reasons why the black left has been so marginalized in the online left in the first place, while at the same time being the most active players in IRL leftist movements off the internet. Like historically, this country's most prominent leftist action has always hinged upon the action of black people, the most prominent underclass in the country. Even if you want to look at like voting patterns, just the baseline liberal Democrat desire to not elect fascists, it's black people who show the most solidarity against the rise of extremism from the Republican Party. It's why the leaders of the black left were jailed or assassinated or exiled, if they were lucky, in the 60s and 70s going into the 80s. And it's why the black left is rendered invisible today, because the powers that be know that there will never really be any form of a socialist leftist movement in America without the full participation of black people. Nobody else is really capable of doing the shit because everybody else is much more invested in the system. However, the online left is overwhelmingly white, a petite bourgeois white community, in fact. And many of these online leftists encounter leftist ideology first online through one of many video essayists or commentators, or in college, or both. Places and institutions that tend to exclude the most prominent Black leftist thinkers from the space, and thus set the tone for what voices are welcome and which ones are not. And in setting that tone, they never check their own racist tendencies, and definitely lack knowledge of these Black socialist movements, which these folks hold the power in the space, which means that in order to have a conversation about Black nationalism, the cornerstone of many Black socialist projects worldwide, Black leftists need to tiptoe around the shared language with white nationalists, just so that white leftists can feel safe and comfortable that you're not one of those Black Nazis that are totally a huge issue in the Black community. Even still, in an ideal world, a world without the panopticon, where ideological conflict and drama aren't as prominent and Black leftist voices aren't as marginalized, this could have been the end of this particular thread of debate. It could have been left at agree to disagree. But many within these various spaces, but outside of the streamer community, found the result of this debate to be abhorrent. And many within that community took it upon themselves to rally their tribe and attack Professor Flowers incessantly, labeling her a genocide enthusiast and an anti-white racist who will be okay with genociding white people. By the way, Professor Flowers is adopted and her parents are white.
I remember like after the debate, there was a clip of me, and I couldn't even watch the clip because I had peeked at the comments and they were already saying I wanted to genocide white people. So I was like, I can't even like watch this clip because it's gonna just mess with me. But I remember seeing the number on the clip and it was at 360,000 views. And I had just never, ever like had that many people like paying attention to me. And at that point in time, all those people thought I wanted to genocide white people and thought that I wanted to make a Black ethno state. And it was just like, it was just wild. It's like, what do I even do? Like, you can't fight against that if you have a platform that small. You can't be like, listen, this is what I'm trying to say, or this is what I believe. When you have like that many eyes on you who are like saying to the contrary.
Right. And then it becomes because they have to turn you into a monster, nothing you say will ever be effective enough. You know what I mean? One of the funniest things to show how much of this is tribal and not really about accountability is how narratives around this event have been built that are not at all tied to reality. Like, there are many within the streamer community that characterize this conflict to be about land back, the indigenous decolonization movement happening in North America, which was also sadly slandered in the process. That if you're not hyper focused on the tactics, because within 5 minutes he brings up genocide. And it's so funny, people that claim to like have a good perspective on this and why you're so wrong will often say that it was you that came to Vosh to talk about land back.
Yeah.
when
that really is so is it okay if I like just chime in on that?
Yeah.
That is something that really disturbed me because I had never talked about land back in that debate, and just like the way that like that the clips blew up around land back because people heard decolonization. It's just like the damage that did to talking about land back was just really disturbing.
The narrative is also that Professor Flowers is pro-genocide, when if you watch this 3-hour-long thing, which I really did try. I could only get through the first 90 minutes because I think I got the picture. And it proves my point because within the first 5 minutes, it's Vosh who brings up genocide.
And it seems like the fundamental bones are pretty similar. And then when you get into the logistics of creating an ethno-state, there's not really any way to do that without genocide, you know? Like, take South Africa, right? I mean, it's all well and good to talk about living free of your oppressors, but when you break apartheid in South Africa, there are millions of white people living in that country. Like, what do? Do you just like ship them all out? Do you build camps? I mean, it seems like this logic always leads down a really bad road.
And Vosh, who keeps returning to it as Professor Flowers tries to over and over again explain the difference between genocide and anti-colonial violence, something she also did
in several follow-up videos as she was being attacked by this community.
When I say that people don't have to live with their oppressors, that is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about ethnostates. Ian is. Many people believe that this sentiment is actually about white genocide or white ethnic cleansing. I believe that Ian brought up the concern for white genocide because I had mentioned Kenya reclaiming businesses. There are a number of African countries who did this after colonialism because most of the wealth and power was still owned by the colonialists. In other words, even though colonialism had ended in title, it still had ongoing effects in wealth, power, and resources. So there are ways that the post-colonial governments took that power back. Again, this doesn't have to do with retribution, it has to do with power imbalances and attempts to move toward greater equity. In these instances, when a given state takes back businesses, at times the countries who colonize that area stop having access to resource extraction, and sometimes the colonists running these industries leave. However, the ongoing effects of colonialism are still massive issues in post-colonial African countries. My main point is that fixing these problems by way of expropriation is not an ethnic cleansing, as I've seen people argue.
This wasn't about accountability. This was a public shaming effort, and really much worse than that. For half a year, Professor Flowers experienced nonstop harassment, leaving her in a deep suicidal depression, not just on the way she was treated, but also on how it affected her work and worldview and the people around her. It took other white leftists, white male leftists, coming forward to stem the tide of harassment, which is incredibly sad. And I feel guilty that I wasn't one of those voices early on to participate in that. And this, of course, led to them being attacked and harassed for weeks and months on end. But again, just to illustrate the craziness, this debate happened in September of 2021. And way later in February of 2022, I made a video on Black love, not at all really connected to leftist political ideas and issues. And I decided I would have Professor Flowers read one line in it. Do you know these motherfucking Vosh stands jumped in my comment section with the nerve to tell me that they were disappointed in me for associating with her? These people committed her voice to memory just so they could police her presence on my channel. Much like with DJ Mule, they were trying to hold me accountable to their community and their sensibilities, which of course I didn't. But let's for a second imagine, right, that Professor Flowers did do some real harm here. Let's imagine for a moment that we live in a world where white South Africans have to worry about being ethnically cleansed and don't control 95% of the wealth in the nation they colonize, even after decolonization efforts that have happened in that nation, and that Professor Flowers was somehow irresponsible in her language. The ensuing harassment campaign was for what purpose? What lesson was to be learned there? What goal could people possibly have been pursuing? Was it really trying to hold her accountable and change her ideas or critique them? Or was it to protect tribal interests and exert power over someone and save a small man's ego? Pulling it forward to DJ Mule, was the hours and hours of anti-DJ Mule content for this figure with, again, less than 10,000 subscribers, was that to make the left a better place and defend Xander Hall from personal attacks? Or was it to finally claim a sense of justifiable retribution against the woke scolds that have been looking down on that community for years now?
To this, because they are very bored and they don't have much content. And so the drama that they create with us becomes their content farm. And so they're looking for ways that they'll hope for you to mess up, because that's more engagement for them specifically.
So that's what they're all looking for. And that's why Demon Mama went hard on me and was like, he's an abuse apologist, blah, 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 because they're all looking for their Vosh moment. Like Xander Hall's looking for it all the time. You can see it in his content. You can see it. He's like, all these guys have got Xander Hall derangement syndrome. It's no longer Vosh derangement syndrome. It's Xander Hall derangement syndrome.
But here's a twist, and something I want those of you who have enjoyed this section thus far, I really want y'all to hear. The debate streamers in that drama-oriented vein may be a problem, and I tend not to be a fan, but they're not unique, and they aren't the only problem. And I tried to say this before, and I don't think people got it, so I'm gonna say it again. The toxic behavior in that community isn't isolated to their space. And more than ever, I'm realizing now the fact that we've relegated this type of toxic behavior to be indicative of a problem within mostly that community is a huge problem and a significant misunderstanding of accountability as a whole. In fact, just to put my money where my mouth is, despite the popular narrative, I have not for a while been much of an anti-debate guy. In fact, when most anybody says they're anti-debate bro, I feel like they're really only talking about 2 or 3 people and their general fan bases, which is shared around between them. By the way, for those of you in the political streamer community who seem to be frustrated that nobody brings you up when it's time to complain about debate bros, this is why. We're not talking about y'all. Sorry. I would think it's a compliment that you haven't been toxic enough to get complained about. But if that offends, I apologize. It's never been about the small dozen or so creators who may or may not be shitty, but still have all the aesthetics. It's been about a handful of bigger streamers who, along with being prone to shitty behavior, also happen to have their communities attack people who critique them. I'm getting off subject. I really don't like these motherfuckers, so I can't stop critiquing them. What I'm trying to say is that debate good, actually. And I'm not going to retread all the reasons why I've said this in the past. I'll leave a really good video that explains why I think that, in the description. But beyond defending the concept of debate and political streaming, let's go back to the concept of harassment and the accountability myth. Let's go back to the real purpose of public shaming as I see it. What were you canceled for?
Well, I think that there have been 3 distinct waves of people deciding that they just absolutely hated my guts. I had gone to a protest. I had gone to a protest with a combat army medic, and I had gone to learn on the ground with her and another girl who had issues with me, and who had been, kind of telling some lies and, kind of stirring some drama online. She was invited there, and she heard me kissing someone in the hotel room that I had bought for us. And she went online to say that I had been having sex in the bed next to her and that I had sexually harassed her by doing that. Okay, not that I think there's a big difference between being rude and being a sexual predator. I know there's an ocean between like being rude in a way that it's like, okay, that's like kind of PDA, and you're like being a bad hotel roommate, right? So there's a big difference between that and like you triggered someone's sexual PTSD and you're a sexual predator. Like, these are different sports.
I had a few conversations with Merrick before this one, usually discussing how I made video essays and issues around the manosphere. And when the drama with DJ Mule unfurled, she reached out to me to hopefully cut through the usual tribal nonsense to get me to see what I couldn't see from my perspective. And in that conversation, I also learned about her experiences with being harassed and canceled, again, within the online leftist community. In some of the most prominent online leftist spaces and discourses, Merrick, another super small creator with minimal impact, was being targeted for continual online harassment.
So someone photoshopped my YouTube page and someone cut up clips of a YouTube video of mine that was actually me explaining another drama I'd been involved in. And they decided that they were going to frame me for the Nashville bombing hours after it happened. And it was boosted by a bunch of leftist, communist, anarchist accounts on Twitter. People in my real life were finding my small personal Facebook and Instagram accounts and being like, who are you? What the fuck? Why did you do this? Fuck you. And I was like, whoa. I didn't even know it had happened yet. And my inboxes were being flooded with people being like, do you know about this? Do you know that when I Google this terrorist attack, you come up? So yeah. I saw this rumor that I have sex with dogs because I rescued a dog. I think a lot of people aren't doing it on purpose, and every nasty little hate comment or every new rumor, like, it's all just one person, right? But when you see 100 of those a day, right after the Nashville bombing stuff happened, there was a tweet about me that went viral that said, if you ever feel bad for Merrick DeVille, don't. And remember that she used a Black Lives Matter protest. She went to a Black Lives Matter protest and didn't do anything, didn't help anyone, promoted her OnlyFans, and was told never to come back. Wow. Don't feel bad for anything that happens to her. None of that's true. Nothing like that ever happened.
I am not in community with Merrick. I don't know what dirt Merrick may have in her background, what specific thing that people latched on to decide that she would be public enemy number one. I'm sure Merrick has done X amount of horrible things that I did not know about, but nothing in my head makes her deserve some of the things she's talking about experiencing. If a fraction of what she's described is real, I don't see how any of this shit is justified. And just as with DJ Mule and Professor Flowers, why all this smoke for a small creator with minimal impact on the community? And notice now, it's not just debate bros, but everybody seems to be real comfortable targeting queer men, women, people of color, and sometimes all three. And you can't blame her harassment experience on the debate streamer community. In fact, it was that community in particular who eventually came to her rescue while she was being harassed. So, debate bros good, actually?
So, the only reason that I'm like, I think as okay as I am right now, the only reason I still have a presence online is because of Xander Hall, actually. And one of the reasons why I think it's really, really hard for me to see Vosh and to see Xander Hall as these evil people is because when, like, it's like the terminally online, like, you probably are not even familiar with this group of Twitter users. They're like super terminally online, like communist, irony poisoned. They're like the podcast crowd of like shit posters on Twitter. It was a lot of those people that decided they really hated me.
A larger defense squad, for you, it must be unbearable. I really do hope that things get better soon. And I'm not trying to make this some like victim wah type thing, but like nobody should be forced to experience the kind of stuff that you've experienced. It's ridiculous, but we can't even talk about it. You'll get made fun of just for talking to me, and I'll get called a simp just for sympathizing with you.
There is value in community, even if it's not mine or not one I want to associate with. Shit is hard out there. If folks find like watching a debate streamer play Dark Souls and react to something Ben Shapiro said gets them through the day, do that shit. Like, do that shit for real. It's a net positive that helps people. And it's positive that there's this maybe imperfect form of leftist rhetoric being introduced to 14-year-olds watching Twitch. Also, despite the numerous bad moments from many within this space, and especially their fans, there's something to say about this space being very pro-trans in ways that some leftists and definitely a lot of liberals can't seem to muster. And they platform trans creators, and there's an outsized trans audience in some of these spaces because of that. So clearly this space exists for a reason. It's not just a bunch of edgelords using the R slur, poorly arguing around leftist issues and playing video games. But that's how they're often viewed and, generally speaking, painted only by the worst of whom they share community with. Those who just consume the content passively, much like I might in old Max Landis video, will get snared with the worst of what that community does. Now, don't get me wrong. I do not like a lot of these people, and especially the major figureheads within that community, for reasons I think should be obvious at this point, but I don't think it's a substantive critique to pretend like there's no value in this space. And I'm suspicious as to why that sentiment has become so popular among people who would consider themselves people that analyze things critically. Like, one thing you'll notice as an outsider is that for all the complaining that is done about the most prominent people within this space, they also receive a massive amount of hate and pushback outside of their tribe. The same way I've seen people randomly jump into the subtweets of DJ Mule or Professor Flowers or myself just to throw shots, I've also seen that happen to Vosh. In fact, Vosh gets so much ridiculous hate that within his community, it's a running joke. Like, it's a running joke that Vosh is actually a CIA plant meant to derail the radical potential of breadtube, which is laughable on multiple levels. There's also lots of accusations that Voss is, I'll say, a pig. If you catch what I'm getting at there, you know, trying not to get this demonetized. Now, this is because Vosh has said some ridiculous things about Pedialyte drinking in the past.
It is possible for an adult and a child to have a relationship and for it to have positive outcomes on the child as well. That is possible.
And nobody should be saying those types of things publicly and expecting not to be seen as a weird guy. But I got to be honest, though this may seem controversial, I don't think Voss drinks Pedialyte. The reality is that a lot of people within that community talk about Pedialyte in a way that many would find repulsive, but within community, it's just kind of a thing they do. And trivializing the nature of child predators or CIA targeting is kind of shitty, actually. And like, let me remind you who the CIA usually targets in spaces like this. But Vosh is hated on the right, on the left, and even by members of his own community. His name trends all the time. I've seen people post that his name trends so much that it's burned the graphic trending Vosh into their phones. And I'm gonna be real, I don't know how he handles that. I had a hard time with the 2 or 3 week stint where I had to see my face all over my feed with attacks and response videos. But like literally, Vosh gets one of those a month for the last couple of years.
So right now, being a normie is actually a detriment. Autism pilling is actually the height of sexual success. Yeah.
This site basically allows its users to learn about anime. There's nothing necessarily bad with that.
In order for that to proceed smoothly, you'll need something called good
Maybe you should try
faith.
something else.
Shut up, bitch.
Not something I'd have chosen for myself, but hey, whatever gets you going.
Stupid fucking bitch.
And the thing that's most frustrating is that many of these videos are these sensational, exaggerated attacks on him that call him a Pedialyte drinker and a CIA operative and obfuscate the real critiques on Vosh and give him rooms to dismiss stuff outright. Like, y'all, Vosh isn't a Pedialyte drinker. Stop calling him that. He's a racist. Focus on that. It's really easy to prove, and it should be all you need. Is the stuff we know not enough? There's a reason people don't focus on that, and I'll come back to it later. I remember after the drama he had with American Johnson and Cat Black and ContraPoints. Also, like, this is within his never-ending drama with Destiny, who has like a larger community and they are like always attacking each other. You can see there's a lot of drama involved with this guy. It was the drama with Noah Sampson, which came somehow before and after a lot of this. All the drama that I'm speaking of, for a moment, maybe this is me projecting, I feel like I saw it on his face when he talked to Noah Sampson on stream.
Harass me because it makes me out to be the instigator, the eternal arbiter of harassment, who can never ever have too much done against them. I do think a lot of it is a narrative-based thing. The issue is that a lot of people do view me as some kind of big, bad, scary antagonist, a person who's representative of the rot in the online left, and also because people constantly talk about this alleged harassment from my community, a person who mobilizes this massive wave of hate that people will get after.
Several months later.
All right, thank you guys. Keep it up, though. Don't get complacent. The more of you are in the replies being like, that's not what's happening right here. Like, this is necessary, okay? Publicly shame her into changing her mind on this. Move you off this site and into, I don't want to bring up the substance abuse.
I've heard and seen a few times people refer to Debate Bros as the new alt-right. Initially, I agreed with this uncritically. They're definitely cut from the same cloth and occupy many of the same spaces online. They definitely participate in harassment campaigns against people they don't like. But what I'm starting to realize is that Debate Bros aren't the alt-right. They're not that bad. Instead, they're really controlled opposition. In a post-Trump world where figures like the Quartering or Armored Skeptic are no longer relevant, and one of the OGs of the anti-SJW world, the Amazing Atheist, has kind of turned over a new leaf, plus guys like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson being outside of the sphere where you can kind of farm content, some of the most valuable figures for the attention economy are debate bros. I know for a fact that if I put Vosh's face on the thumbnail for this video, it will get more clicks. I know this because last April, I put his silhouette in my April Fool's thumbnail, and that shit hit 1 out of 10 by a wide margin until people realized it was a prank. I know this because I get so many emails and comments and tweets asking me to talk to Vosh or talk about Vosh and other debate bros. And since the beginning, before when I first had 100,000 subscribers, this was people saying, FD, choose a side. And obviously I chose not to side with debate bros because I don't like them, but they're not monsters. Neither is Merrick, neither is Professor Flowers, neither is Hassan, neither is DJ Mule. Neither is Rewired Soul for that matter. But we overstate the possible badness of these figures to justify treating them inhumanly. We call it accountability, but that's not really what we're talking about 90% of the time.
People make it seem like you're a bad person, you're a villain, you're
Right.
immoral. They have to moralize their content consumption. And they have to also moralize like the kinds of content that they don't like. And this is ironic because this is a very liberal tendency because liberals have no way of doing materialist analysis. It's antithetical to their worldview, and therefore they like to harp on cultural signifiers. And ironically, that's why you get this like my consumption is saying something about my morals. That's why I'm consuming good things and not bad things. That's why there's so much cultural analysis, and not in like a Gramscian sense, but instead in more so like why is there a bad character in in this new movie that's doing bad things, but he looks kind of cool, which is almost like this puritanical 90s era. Anti-video game, anti-violence momentum that you're seeing both from the left and the right, because no one has any grasp on systemic change or how to do it, how to accomplish it. So there is no, like, people don't have the capacity. They understand the systems are oppressive. They see they experience the contradictions, even if they don't recognize it personally, or like they don't see exactly what it is. And there's this sense of unease. But they also kind of understand that systemic change is really difficult to achieve, impossible as a matter of fact. So they just pick apart like whatever they can and just hyper focus in these like little communities that they've created on the internet. And all of it revolves around consumption. It's never about like genuine moves. It's never about like,
it's about who you watch. What does who you watch say about you? Will say stuff like they're harmful to the left or to social movements, which maybe is true to an extent, but to what extent? DJ Mule, again, less than 10,000 followers. Professor Flowers, less than 30,000. Xander Hall, less than 100,000. Vosh has over 400,000 subscribers. When you look at the view counts of his content on YouTube, he rarely breaks half of that. I don't think he's done it but once or twice in the last couple of years, and one of those is the video with Professor Flowers. 75% of his community, at least on YouTube, has checked the fuck out because he's kind of like the entry point for a lot of people until they figure out, So it's not much about the spreading of bad ideas either. But I'm sure some will try to say, for whichever one of those figures in that list that they hate the most, that it's not about some tribal behavior. It is about accountability and the spreading of bad ideas and setting an appropriate example for the community. That these various communities have the right and the necessity to protect themselves in their spaces, which sometimes means making an example out of transgressive behaviors within and outside of community. And I agree with that to an extent. But without a critical eye on this behavior, we all have created not so much a cancel culture, right, as is often employed by conservatives, but definitely a culture where we incentivize outrage. It gets us clicks. it gets us likes, it gets us clout and attention. And because it's so closely tied to identities within these communities, and dissension within the community is dangerous, we have little to no critical framework on our own behavior and whether or not we're doing the right thing a lot of times. All the analysis of problems gets edited out the discussion. We just want to keep community intact. And what that does is prime us for doing too much and really being manipulated sometimes by people who know this about us and know this pattern and know how to use this outrage. And they'll use it at a minimum to keep our wheels spinning, or at worst, to even get us to attack our own. So the first question I guess I want to ask, and I'm going to ask this to everybody, is why were you canceled?
That one's a hard one because it's so, it's difficult for me to talk about this without being like, I'm the real victim here. And that's what always happens. And you always have to approach it with nuance because you can't say you never did anything wrong.
So if you've watched my content, you may have heard me talk about Lindsay Ellis a couple of times. If you're familiar with LeftTube, BreadTube, film, YouTube, a lot of other areas, you're familiar with Lindsay Ellis. But to kind of give a brief intro, Lindsay Ellis is a pretty iconic figure, both on LeftTube, but also like in YouTube as a whole. She helped pioneer this style of content. She was a big influence on mine, one of, I guess, the few influences that aren't overtly toxic, clearly, but also just like my other influences, Lindsay was canceled a couple of years ago. But understanding Lindsay's cancellation from a couple of years ago and looking back at it with hindsight is the most potent evidence that this holding people accountable, the accountability myth that I've been talking about, is incredibly flawed and hard to make sense of under any type of heavy scrutiny.
I made a tweet observing that the Disney movie, which came out in 2021, Raya and the Last Dragon, was structurally very similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender, and observed that maybe we should have a name for this sort of genre of Avatar: The Last Airbender knockoffs, because that structure in fantasy, particularly YA fantasy, had become very popular over the last 10 years. People saw this tweet and read into it that I was implying that the comment about genre was in reference to the fact that both of these two properties are Asian inspired, despite the fact that they are both made by Western megacorps. So I was very confused by this. I got defensive. That made it worse. And I realized that Twitter was a big problem, both for me and was also kind of enabling this harassment campaign. And so I deleted my Twitter, and that made it even worse. And so once I deleted my Twitter, I started trending, and people used this opportunity to drag out every perceived wrong I had ever done. And it just kind of snowballed from there.
I went back and searched to see who were the people who were really going hard on Lindsay Ellis and what it is that they were saying. And the first thing I noticed is that I found relatively little compared to what I remembered seeing when this was all happening. What I did find that was still there that was negative barely engaged with the fact that all of this drama with Lindsay started with a relatively mild take on an animated movie that to this day few people care about and few people have actually even seen. If you want to be kind of uncharitable, you can definitely consider Lindsay's tweet to be a microaggression.
Like many people with certain privileges of perspective, Lindsay didn't think enough about how her words might be construed differently from someone else's perspective. It was also in the middle of a wave of hatred against Asian Americans during COVID, so tensions around any topic involving Asian people were high. But it still didn't quite make sense of the totality of what happened here. Folks who clearly must have been waiting for this moment crafted a whole dossier, or outline of everything that Lindsay had done from this moment going back like a decade, including content from a very different era of YouTube that didn't age all that well. And in isolation, many of these moments over the years deserve critique and discussion as a part of how many people, myself included, contributed and participated in harmful acts to other people through regressive behavior that we had been conditioned to engage in. Had that been the core of the critique, it wouldn't have been as bizarre and like wild of a thing to witness. And while, to be fair, there were definitely important conversations being had around this particular issue during this, feeding frenzy of public shaming, the main thing being done was narrative building and exaggeration of harm, much like I described for DJ Mule or Professor Flowers or even for Vosh, because that is really what this is all about.
Like all of the people who were joyfully, hopping in on that dog pile were like, well, the ends justify the means. And in my case, it was just like, who do you think has been keeping tabs on all this? Who do you think has been keeping these narratives alive? Stuff, not the more recent stuff, but stuff from like 5-10 years ago. It's not Tumblr teens. It's Kiwi farms. And once you are like in this narrative of like, I'm joining in on this dog pile for justice reasons, not because it's fun and not because I find it personally gratifying, but it's for justice. Then like whenever, this thing of like, well, who is the type of person that keeps these receipts?
Lindsay's public shaming illustrates the type of exaggerations that we let pass as substantive critiques, as long as it means that we can run with our particular tribe and we get the catharsis of public shaming. It shows why we don't bother with substantive critiques of certain figures and go straight for everyone is a pedophile or an abuser or a Nazi. We pick those images because those images don't often really require much analysis or explanation. And to attempt to side with a person that has been effectively labeled with those images is to then open yourself up to public shaming, which then flattens any and all possible discourse and any and all possible actual accountability that might come from that situation. But we really don't care because it gets us the drama we actually want. And so because of this, DJ Mule isn't just a guy who made some insensitive comments about another guy and his ex-girlfriend. No, he's an abuser, or at a minimum, an abuse apologizer. Professor Flowers isn't just a person who didn't perform well in a debate with a hostile audience. They are a reverse racist who wants to genocide white people. Hassan isn't just a young, successful leftist who is just indulging in his money and fame. He's also somehow a sexual predator and everything that's wrong with the left. And Voss isn't just a guy who has some very clear racist tendencies in his analysis and regularly says offensive things because he wants to be seen as edgy. All good reasons to critique Vosh. No, he's also a pedophile, a CIA agent, and sexually attracted to horses. Yes, these are real things people say about this dude.
It took a long time to kind of pull out of the, predominant negativity that dominated the, Augie, the Augie sphere. The Augie sphere of the early 2010s. And even to this day, it was pretty rare for negative content to not outperform neutral or positive content. And I will say that my highest viewed video ever is positive, and it's the one about Robin Williams. But by and large, the takedown, savage, that stuff does tend to be what makes people subscribe or why people tune in. So it's if you are building your audience on
algorithm pleasing anger and takedowns, and once you get to a certain point, you will want to pivot from that because it's exhausting, or you're just going to turn into like full grifter. Like those are the two roads.
And this is complicated and hard to talk about because I want to be clear. There is the capacity to do serious harm for people with these platforms if we don't continue to try to hold them accountable. I don't want to trivialize the serious reasons why critique and cries for accountability or even deplatforming are in many cases important. Something that came up since I first started researching for this video is that Vosh has admitted to sexually harassing at least one woman online before he was a much larger figure. And this came up because Vosh has become a leading voice on the left about talking about men's issues. And recently another figure within social media, Andrew Callahan, was also accused of several incidents of sexual misconduct. And it just kind of seemed weird to have Vosh being the lead person critiquing that particular issue. And then another person who I was trying not to talk about in this video, but it seems almost inappropriate not to bring it up, a streamer named Keffels was just saying like how she wants her fans to infiltrate Black queer spaces and impersonate Black people online in order to sow distrust and destroy their online communities.
Oh, this is gonna be great. You just got here. Are we spreading misinfo? Yeah, I'm doing gay ops on Tender queers by encouraging my I'm encouraging my followers to make pick crew accounts and infiltrate Tender queer Twitter. Because once they catch wind of the plan that we're using pick crews to infiltrate Tender queer Twitter, they're going to all become incredibly suspicious of pick crews and they will eat each other alive. Does it matter which pick crew? No, just use a random one. But the more diverse, the better. Like, make it like a Black butch lesbian with like, I don't know.
These are the types of issues that should be getting the most discourse around accountability. There should be clear rebukes from people within these communities to address this behavior. But as far as I can tell, it's not happening because that's not how this works. So it makes sense on some level that people harp on these issues, if not just as protective factors. I am not in every conversation around harm or even in the communities that receive the most harm online. And if, say, a major streamer carelessly advocated that Black people protesting police brutality should be shot in the street, I'd probably have a few things to say about it. But I'd also try to remain critical of wasting a ton of time trying to hold said person accountable when I don't have the power to do that and I have better things to do. If the community people come from don't demand change and restoration, then it doesn't matter what is being said on the outside. It doesn't matter how many tweets, how many attack videos you do. You cannot change that dynamic. Max Landis just last week released another video addressing his cancellation.
I wrote here, for years, I had awful, messy relationships and where I was a toxic partner. And this spread to even my casual relationships. This was just about the way I treated people. I was never, in the discussion about me and in public shamings, they want people to either be a sociopathic narcissist predator or a totally innocent ally. And the truth is, I'm not a sociopathic narcissist predator, but through my life, I understand why people hate me enough to say that.
And I doubt it changes anything about his situation and how he's perceived because of the community he is beholden to. I haven't followed Landis in years, so I don't know how to judge his changes since being canceled, considering that Landis has had more serious accusations and was already a divisive figure beforehand. I get why his numerous attempts at apologizing haven't allowed him to recover to anywhere close to where he was. And again, you're only as canceled as your next project. But I think looking at his situation kind of exemplifies the flaws of this accountability myth, in that we don't really have a developed framework for what real accountability looks like. And I'd argue that a lot of us don't care.
But I guess and do put this in because I want this to go on the record. Like, this is going to be the last time I ever talk about this. I'm sick of talking about it. I don't want to be defined by this. And I will admit that it is absolutely my fault that this is the case. I have put myself in this position by putting it out there and not taking into consideration just how addicted to this type of drama people are, and how eager people are to just turn this into your entire personality. Like everything I did before, the Twitter incident didn't really matter because it was like suddenly I could be another pawn in the cancel culture war. And like I am sick to death of people I was at a book event like specifically for that, and there were like more than 100 people there, and we opened it up to the Q&A, and this girl in the front row asks, hey, my friend is in the process of getting canceled. What should I do? And I'm here to talk about aliens and science fiction and shit. Like, this is really inappropriate. And I didn't want to upset her, but I was just like, how do I make this stop? And I feel like the only way to make it stop is say, don't do it. So this is it. This is it. Never talking about it again. Tempted though I might be, because so much of my hell that I am living through right now is predicated on bad media literacy, which is my thing. But if I keep talking about it, there's going to be more pushback and more bad literacy and more bad faith and more willful misinterpretation. So this is it. I am staking my metaphor in the sand. There's no more forever after this conversation.
On that Broy Deschanel video about canceling, Landis actually left another comment basically asking, what am I supposed to do? And I don't have a good answer for that. And I don't think anybody does, to be honest with you. There definitely needs to be a greater discussion and investigation on what the appropriate response is to people who transgress and then submit to being held accountable that we haven't had yet. And my problem is we think we've already had it. And I want to be clear, the people I featured in this video that have problematic and sketchy pasts, the goal wasn't to launder their names or make you rethink whether or not they're being treated fairly. I don't want anyone to give Rewired Soul a pass on his toxic behavior or ignore Hassan's edginess or forgive Max Landis. I just want to again ask, why are we like this? What are we actually doing when we leave the 15th mean comment or tweet about a particular figure? It's not praxis, it's drama. What's probably going to be hard to swallow for some BreadTube fans is that many of us are in practice apolitical and mostly experience and do politics through our consumption habits. As I said earlier, the vast majority of at least online leftists, especially in the West, did not come through organized resistance within oppressed and marginalized communities. They got it from a sociology or political science course in college. The vast majority of online leftists are not the working class proletariat. They are children of the bourgeoisie. The vast majority of the online left have never organized, protested, threw a rock, or cut a check in the name of resistance. But they got lots of tweets, lots and lots of tweets. If tweets could bring the revolution, we'd have 4 or 5 revolutions by now. Us fighting amongst each other, even the shittiest people that are deserving of a fight within our community, whether we like it or not, at this magnitude, that is not a form of resistance. And it's obvious that we're not talking politics in a lot of these spaces. We're talking drama, especially when you know certain figures thrive off the drama that they either engage in or themselves create. And on the flip side, the strongest analysis on safe and easily commodified topics in your favorite video essay does not challenge the superstructure that affects us in the way we want to think it does. I love me some Jordan Peterson cringe videos. I am looking forward to the next one, but I watch those understanding that as entertainment, and I don't know if everyone in the BreadTube atmosphere realizes this. In his book, Elite Capture, philosopher Olufemi Otaiwo talks about how identity politics are often weaponized by elites to wind would-be resistance efforts into circles of meaningless conflicts. And he talks about how the championing and promoting of specific voices in a room to be the thought leaders and spokespeople for certain issues fails to consider who actually built the room that the discussion happened in the first place, and who decided which voices would be the ones to be reclaimed champions.
One of the central challenges that the book is trying to put forward is this idea of pipelines, this idea that where things end up is built into our social system in the way that pipelines are built into the plumbing. And that's the kind of lighthouse that we should shine on our individual interactions. Why is it that I'm even in a position to talk to this person? It has to do with where advantages have been pipelined to and where disadvantages have been pipelined to. And so maybe appreciating that means that I shouldn't be so quick to trust which views I have access to, which ideas, which people, which perspectives have been pipelined into my social space. Maybe I should be willing to take a second look at that and think, what am I missing? Which perspectives have I not heard from? What isn't in this room because of how our society is built?
Just because people get a platform to speak on certain ideas doesn't mean that they are the best voice to engage in certain conversations, or that they're not still a part of the problem. And yes, this includes me. All of this talk about accountability is cap, sus, nonsense, bogus, fugazi, bullshit. Because it's accountability to who? And it's accountability for what? And I am at my limit taking this drama disguised as accountability within BreadTube seriously. An ongoing conversation from some folks in the last few years has been about how BreadTube is dying, and some folks' subscriber counts are slowing down or even dropping, and their views are dropping, and certain content creators don't post as much, and the BreadTube Reddit is completely dead. And I guess this is true to an extent, but when you consider the way that BreadTube was really first created and what forces shaped it and what forces sustained it, the takeaway that I have is that the title of this video is a lie. BreadTube isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. There's a bunch of different videos explaining BreadTube as a concept and how it was formulated. Go watch mine after you finish watching this video. But after watching that one, you also should check out the ones from T1J, my evil twin, because he brings up a very important element that I missed. He points out how BreadTube came to be, which is that BreadTube, more than anything, was really about a clique of people.
And that's the thing about LeftTube is we didn't make it up. We weren't trying to create a group. We just made videos about stuff that we thought was interesting, and somehow it became LeftTube. If you ask any of these large creators, ContraPoints, H-Bomb, Lindsay, none of them give a shit about LeftTube, as far as I can tell. Some of them weren't even aware that it was a thing. At the time and we were talking about it. They heard about it, but they weren't aware that it was this whole thing that people were debating and stuff, because we just want to make videos, man.
You might be tempted to look negatively at some of these figures he's mentioning, your Lindsay Ellis, your PhilosophyTube, your H-Bomb, as if they knew they were creating a clique that would become so powerful and influential and lucrative, and then not wielding it with the necessary intention and ethics to support social change. But then you have to remember that all of these people are not revolutionaries. They're creatives. They're just regular people. PhilosophyTube and Dan Olson and ContraPoints and Jenny Nicholson didn't create BreadTube as a political movement. They didn't plan BreadTube at all. And if you really break it down, it actually wasn't just the fans that created the concept of BreadTube and made it be what it is today. BreadTube is first and foremost a creation of the algorithm. It is a function not explicitly of the intentions of a few talented creators or the desires of a loyal fan base. It is something that was created by an AI, or whatever we should call the algorithm, recognizing that it could combine these unique elements in these artists to create a valuable and viable specialized market that had yet to be tapped into. Initially, this may sound like some type of deep revelation, but really, It's just how algorithms work and how they've always worked. Media algorithms are designed to understand the user's tendencies and motivations and figure out how to use those tendencies and motivations to optimize them as consumers. And on the left, we know this very well. We have critiqued it on numerous occasions. We understand how algorithms shaped the alt-right and Gamergate into the Trump era back in 2016. We have court testimony on the misinformation campaigns that came from Russia and targeted Americans to undermine our elections. We know that a lot of this nonsense contributed to the growth of QAnon and eventually the coup attempt on January 6, 2021. We know all of this, but I don't think we seem to get that we are and have always been just as susceptible to algorithmic optimization. That is what BreadTube is. That's why creators making similar content with as much talent, creators who maybe weren't white or creators with more left-leaning content weren't able to break into the bloodstream of what BreadTube was because they weren't algorithmically viable. And the BreadTube creators just kept making good content. The audience, however, unaware that they were being herded into a target demographic, began to create culture. And in that process began to consolidate power. And in many ways, the consolidation of that power serves to undermine actual liberation efforts and social movements worldwide because we are confusing drama with praxis.
I just remembered seeing these things and being like, I'm not even a person. I'm not even a human being anymore. Like, I've been so thoroughly dehumanized and degraded. I mean, I'm a sex worker on top of all of this too, right? So there's like already obsessive men who are like trying to track me down, find out where I live, like all this crazy shit. And then, you know, when I would express like, I feel scared about stuff like this, people would mock me. And it's one of the ways I approach this now when I see this sort of stuff, when I see someone like just coming at me with insane rumors or like just saying wild stuff or just being really, really mean. One of the things I go, hey, how is this social justice? With you doing this action, like, how are you making the world better? How are you getting us closer to socialism? How are you giving me an avenue to be a better person? How are you teaching me anything right now? How is this social justice? And I've never had anyone, I've either had people be like, oh, okay, well, this is what I was trying to do, or they just stop responding. And I think that's a really good way to reframe this to people, to be like, what are you doing right now? Like, when people are being just shitty, like exclusively horrible, and you go, how is this indicative of the values that you claim you hold?
Yeah.
And I found that that's really...
And BreadTube is like this because BreadTube, just like all of YouTube and most entertainment, is a part of the culture industry. Frankfurt School philosophers Theodore Adorno and Mark Horkheimer coined the term the culture industry to describe broadly the way that our entertainment is designed to work in tandem with oppressive systems to reify capitalism, support personal alienation, and in general keep radical and social change from being possible. We see the culture industry in all of our entertainment, from our movies to our music, TV, etc. But the internet and social media presented a new and complex challenge to the culture industry, as all of these other forms of entertainment were easily controlled by those who owned the means of production. But the internet, YouTube, gave the means of production and distribution back to the people, and we kind of had at least the power to start to subvert that dynamic. But the algorithms change that. I've had the benefit of having a lot of conversations with people who run YouTube, and while I genuinely think most of them are decent people who aren't actively trying to do harm or make the world a worse place, they are still beholden to their corporate goals of capital, and thus have ceded a lot of control to what gets seen, to what ideas get to be amplified to the algorithm. And the algorithm reflects the status quo. It reflects the norms of the society that we live in, with some minimal room for change. It's a scary thought, because what that means is the algorithm is now the means of production, and it picks and chooses who gets its support based on these nebulous factors that it perceives can make it money, not on the best content or the best art, and definitely what content is most valuable to social change. And while we may feel like BreadTube was and is art that subverts and presents venues for pursuing social change, it isn't. It's still entertainment within the culture industry. And it's grown to be one of the most insidiously dangerous parts of the culture industry because it has monopolized and galvanized the attention of those closest to supporting and participating in social action and gotten them, us, overly concentrated on stan culture, parasocial relationships, drama, and beef. We are a few steps from being the Barbs. Some of y'all genuinely are. And this is only possible because in our degraded state, those of us on the left, we find ourselves in need of catharsis to remind us that we're not alone, to build communities that reaffirm and nurture us, and remind us that we're not crazy for thinking the world is on fire and everyone's playing with gasoline. And that's important. And damn, this chubby black dude with the locks and the deep voice really makes me feel connected to a feeling that I feel like I'm missing. He makes me feel safe in a way. He's also managed to illustrate something that's been bothering me in a way I didn't understand until now. And now that I've watched this video, I genuinely feel better. And that's why the algorithm chose me. I do all of those things pretty naturally. I am a useful tool in the culture industry. Most of us who are successful on YouTube are. And I think if any of your favorite bread tubers are a little bit like me, they realize this on an innate level, which is why so many stop participating as much in the community, stop posting as much, and just focus on the thing that gives them happiness, focus on their content and their craft and their creativity, or move on altogether. Because inside this space, if you're at all woke, you sense the alienation in play. You sense that despite your best intentions, your overall presence and success exists to uphold this system. I, along with the rest of RedTube, help grab the stragglers, the ones outside of the hegemonic frame who might challenge it. And we help you find a place within it so you don't fuck around and tear the whole thing down. It's not my goal or intention. I didn't think that's what I was doing when I made that Bo Burnham video in like 3 days and it went viral. I had no clue of all of this. I just wanted to talk about black movies the way Lindsay Ellis did. Shit wasn't supposed to be this deep. And it definitely wasn't supposed to be this hard or this stressful.
And it drives me crazy how many people, every time I post something about my books or Nebula, people are like, come back to YouTube. I wish you were still on YouTube. And I'm like, I don't think you understand or respect the fact that I have no desire to be on YouTube anymore. Like, I don't, and it's like people just can't imagine not wanting attention, you know? And I'm just, I don't like, I maybe could say the desire has been like beaten out of me. It's been bullied out of me. I've seen that take, and then maybe there's some truth to that. But even before the Raya thing happened, I wanted out. I just want to write my dumb sci-fi books. I don't want that. I don't want to be fake famous.
That's been really, really hard. I think for me, I really would much rather, like, you know, even though I've been in this drama, I would actually like to just make content for people who are like in my audience or in my circle. And it's okay if I don't ever get super big. I would just like to make content for people who like appreciate what I'm saying. We can have these deeper conversations and like talk about this. I don't want to always have to police what I'm saying for the sake of catering to people who are quite frankly ignorant.
And I think that exists at a, you know, I'm doing I did a live yesterday. In fact, let me make sure this is finished uploading. I did a live the other day, and even though I haven't experienced the same level of harassment, there is like this weird pressure when you are probably a content creator in general, but definitely in this particular space, and definitely if you're like oh, that's in my eye. I don't like that. Why is that happening?
You know, rinse your eye out really fast.
My right eye, everything is cloudy.
That's not good.
No, that's not good. Left eye is fine.
Hold up. Okay, I think I should call an ambulance. So I'm at the hospital and I'm about to get a CAT scan, which is just one of many tests I've had related to whatever it is I've been going through. And I thought I might want to film this, as I filmed a couple other things. And I just want to document it. I think that there's something to say about this. You know? I don't know what it is to say, but there's something to say. I'll figure it out before anyone sees this. So, not long after this moment, I called an ambulance, then I called my wife. We went to the hospital, and I couldn't help, because this is how I'm wired, like laugh at how ironic it would be to die of like a stroke or heart attack while writing and filming a video about how stressful this job is, and like that video never making it out. But it turns out I didn't have a stroke. I didn't have a heart attack. It was a migraine, a panic attack. I don't know. Those are things I never worried about experiencing until this happened. I made Break Bread in November of last year. It was a video I wanted so many within this community to see, because I felt like it engaged with issues that I hadn't seen be addressed. I was never a super bread tube type of guy. In fact, the point of that original video was to examine how the concept was fundamentally flawed. But at the time, I did see it as an avenue where my goal of expanding the realm of Black leftist content and Black voices could be possible. And it was that, and I did that. Since that time, many of my peers have grown significantly, new people have emerged onto the scene, and Cornbread Tube is thriving on the low. That shit happened, and I'm so happy about it. But it came at a cost. It was also a video that I think in some ways put me on the map within this community. It positioned me as a thought leader of sorts. It gave me responsibilities that I hadn't fully considered. And it also put me in the crosshairs of criticism and scrutiny that I wasn't prepared for. And it came with lots and lots of stress and anxiety. Stress I was used to, but anxiety, this is new. The reverse panopticon, the measuring of my humanity in words, that was new. A few months after that video, I woke up one morning with vertigo and no explanation. I could barely stand or walk for like a week, and it terrified me. And I've had numerous tests and MRIs and CAT scans and everything possible you can consider to make sure there's not something going wrong in here, because I am a 40-year-old Black man who is overweight with high blood pressure, and I have 2 children and a wife, and I am well within the range for an untimely death due to a medical calamity like so many Black men around my age are.
And while YouTube pays well, we are not rich and we are not safe. Now, I hate even attempting to explain the weirdness of this, circumstance, because it's first world problems, even though it's something that's been repeated by every major content creator out there. And we've seen many a very successful big creators stop making content for their mental health. This pressure, this depersonalization, it is something you don't understand till you've been through it, and it sucks. But this is self-inflicted. I made the decision that I wanted to make this a career. I made the decision that I wanted to actively resist being co-opted and not just go with the flow, and reshape the space to be more welcoming and friendly to certain voices. I made the decision to always position myself to try to help others. And for what? For BreadTube?
Shake that load off.
In your face, you're a superstar. Niggas hang around cause of who you are. You get a lot of love cause of what you got. Say they happy for you, but they really not. Sell a lot of records and you roll the bins. Fall up in the spot, now you're losing friends. All you wanna do is give the world your heart. Record label try to make it compromise your art. You make $1 million, make $1 million more. First class fraud, treat you like a nigga pole. You wanna say wait, but you're scared to ask. Your world starts spinning and it's moving fast. Try to stay sane, it's the price of fame. Spending your life trying to numb the pain. You shake that load off and sing your song. Liberate your minds, can you go on home?